Okay, it's 1 o'clock. I think I'll go ahead and get started. Today from the archive, deep in the basement of the John C. Pace Library, we're going to bring you another story about West Florida. And maybe it's appropriate at this time of year we talk about kudzu, the horrible plant that haunts the South and has infected the South, and West Florida is to blame for it. Sorry about that. Trying to turn it. Okay. In beginning the talk, I'll just mention that our story comes from West Florida, from our West Florida collections here in the basement of the John C. Pace Library, where we have nearly 2 million items that cover the history, people, and development of the region from earliest settlement to the present. Over the years, due to gifts of rare books and manuscripts and all, our collection go back to the early years of the 15th century. But today I'm going to share the story of botanical history, of plants and gardening, something that will leave you in awe. Get it? Leave you in awe. It's the story of kudzu, the vine that ate the South. And I want to give you a little overview of the history of this. We start with a man named Carl Peter Thunberg. Now, he was from Uppsala, Sweden, and he got his medical doctorate in 1772. And he studied a variety of topics, but his main interests were natural history and medicine. From 1770 to 1779, he traveled in Europe and the Far East, studying plants and botany, and he often, in return for his trip, he would provide services on ships as a ship surgeon. Later, he returned to Uppsala, Sweden in 1779, spent most of his life at Uppsala University, where he was a botany professor and then a chair of botany. He built up the university botanical collection. He built a garden, a herbarium, a museum, and he used many of the plants that he found on his travels. But for our story, in 1771, he made a trip on a Dutch East India Company ship to Japan. Now, Japan was a very closed society run by the shoguns, and it did not permit foreigners into the country. And in 1771, only the Dutch could trade with Japan. And what Japan did was they built a little artificial island off of Nagasaki called Jojima. And it was to prevent or forbid foreigners from entering and outsiders from entering Japan. In other words, all the ships that came in were inspected. Their sails were confiscated. They confiscated weapons and religious books. And the Dutch traders were only allowed to come in 2 ships a year. And they were on this little island, and there's that control bridge to the mainland. It was a very exclusive thing. We don't know how Thunberg was able to collect Japanese plants. Perhaps they were brought to him. Some people have suggested he adopted a disguise to sneak into Japan. Occasionally, because he was a surgeon, occasionally the doctors that came with these ships were sometimes called to the mainland to treat a high-ranking Japanese official with permission from the authorities. And there was some exchange of culture. The Dutch, for example, they brought in tomato, chocolate, and clover to Japan. So perhaps there was some trading going on here where he was able to get some of the plants. Of course, all this changed later on in 1853 when the U.S. forces under Millard Fillmore and Commodore Matthew Perry sailed into Japan to open Japan to foreign commerce. But anyway, back to Thunberg. One of the plants he discovered was a little plant with tiny flowers, and he gave it the name Pureria thunbergiana, after naming it after himself. And the informal name, it was kudzu. Today, it's simply known as Pureria montana or Pureria lobata, or sometimes just simply kudzu. Now, in Japan, this plant is actually one of the earliest medicinal plants known. And what they would do is they would harvest the roots dry them out, and create a powder. And the powder was used traditionally to treat alcohol abuse. And this is a Japanese woodblock, and it shows them harvesting kudzu, the roots of kudzu, in 1877. And it can still be found. It can still be found today. Um, in fact, in some natural food stores sell kudzu tablets, and all. We really don't know how it works. The mechanism, it's been treated for alcohol abuse, um, and of course the natural um, the instructions here on the natural thing almost imply it could cure anything. Um, but that's that's an area I don't know much about. Anyway, there's been medical research on this even as late as 2013 on the kudzu powder. But anyway, back to our story. But we know how the plant was discovered. We know the Japanese were using it for various purposes. In 1876, the United States held a Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, a large, some people call it the first World Fair. There was at least one earlier, but anyway, this large American fair was to showcase the 100 years of American progress. And they showed off inventions and exhibits and so forth. And they allowed other countries to also have exhibits at this fair. And Japan had an exhibit inside. This is a black and white picture of the Japanese exhibit. And of course, Japanese had only been open to the West for 23 years at this point. Outside of the fairground, they had this garden. And they showed off their plants and gardens and other things. One of the plants they had there was kudzu, and they were promoting it as a foliage and a ground cover and telling people that it also had medicinal property. Papers around the country, even the South, reported on the Japanese exhibit. This is from the Marion, Alabama newspaper in 1876, and it noted that the kudzu also produced a fiber. They would use the fiber from the kudzu plant to make paper, Japanese paper. And it's kind of mentioned here briefly in this article. If also, by 1879, it's kind of starting to get known around the country. The Florida Agriculturals had this article noting that it was a starchy plant, and its creepers covered the ground, spreading over the neighbors and bushes and trees their luxuriant foliage. So it was quite described as a beneficial beneficial plant at this time. Now, sometime in the 1890s, a Quaker couple, Mr. and Mrs. Charles Pleas, C.E. Pleas, emigrated to Chipley, Florida from Indiana. And Mr. and Mrs. Pleas engaged in agriculture and farming, and they also had a personal hobby of photography. It's an interesting family. He produced a lot of glass plates. We have about 139 here in the archive from the family. We have about 139 of the glass plates with which we have created black and white images. And most of them are unidentified. We don't know who they are. This one, we had to title them ourselves in order to catalog. So we call this one "Women Feeding Chickens," and this could actually be Mrs. Pleas. We really don't know, but they're really artistic pictures. And he also took a lot of pictures of natural items, and he would take pictures of bugs and flower arrangements and plants and other kinds of things. There's some note in the Chipley newspapers about Mr. Plea taking photographs at local events, family get-togethers, weddings, and things like that. This is perhaps one of the most unusual pictures in the collection. We call it "Family in a Tree." We have no idea which family this is, but the idea of making everybody climb up in the tree and taking their pictures is certainly, I've never heard of anyone else doing that, even today. It was kind of ironic. Now, about 1902, Mr. Pleve heard about the kudzu plant, and he ordered some seeds from Japan, and he planted them. And he said they didn't do well. And he wrote an article. I got this from an article, and he wrote a few, and he didn't do very well the first year, and they did better the second year, but he was not pleased, and he tore out the vine. He pulled it all out, and he decided to get rid of it. He just didn't like it. And his wife convinced him to throw it onto the compost pile from their garden. They thought that it would help cover it and make the compost pile look a little bit better. And it did, and it started growing. And it took over the pile and began to spread to a horse shed where the flea found his horses munching on it. And that got him kind of curious. By the fall of 1905, he reported that the vine had now grown and filled the 50-foot by 80-foot space between his garden, his barn, drive, and his neighbor's house. And again, he found some of the animals were munching on it, from the cows, some of the horses, and all that. So he sent a sample to Tallahassee, to the State Agricultural Department in 1905, for them to look at it. And they wrote back, and they had analyzed it, and they said it would make a fine hay, Japanese kudzu hay. And they analyzed it, and it was high in protein. It had good starch and sugar, heavy in fiber, low in fat, and it compared favorably with some of the other hays that farmers use, like cowpea and others. And they thought it would be a pretty good thing. Now, I should note that Place is not the only person that's interested in kudzu in the United States. He seems to be the primary person in the South, but he's not the only one extolling it. There was a book published in 1903, 1907, called Our Country Home. And the purpose of the book is how a family in Wisconsin, how they transformed their home and their woodland, and they decided to grow kudzu. And they showed some pictures here of what the porch looked like, what the kudzu looked like when they started in middle May, and what it looked like by September. And they liked it really, really nice. And the only thing I caution people about this is the fact that Wisconsin summer and winter are not as temperate as Florida. They wrote in their book that it bound upward and onward over all the obstacles, arriving at the window ledge, reaching the awnings, and still not content until the roof be scaled and it can see what is beyond. Almost as wonderful plan as a living thing. And then they describe it even more romantically, saying it was the kudzu vine, which is the fairy planted by the house of Sleeping Beauty, and that no doubt the kudzu was the jack and the beanstalk plant too. Very romantic little book, and of course it convinced Midwestern farmers and upper Midwestern gardeners to add kudzu. And originally being from the Midwest myself, I do know that the cold and the winter, the freezing will kill it, but we don't see that. We really don't see that here in Florida or in large parts of the South. And this is a company in Minnesota, and they also were promoting the Japanese kudzu vine and selling seed and all that. So these states, and of course these states now are not covered with kudzu because Pleve apparently did not realize something that northern gardeners know, and that is the plant dies with the frost in the winter. Now, of course, Pleve began to be excited about kudzu. I mean, it seemed to grow well in the soil. It held the sandy soil together. It was pretty. It was green. It seemed to flourish without a great deal of water. It looked really pretty. Everybody described it in such romantic condition. And he wrote an article for what was a magazine called the Florida East Coast Seeker in October of 1908, and told everybody about this new plant, this new forage, nitrogen producing plant, and how great it for livestock, and how it just is a wonderful thing. And he and his article brought he pointed out to people that he was going to offer the kudzu plant, and so he started a nursery. And this is one of his last plates of his kudzu nursery about 1908, where he's cultivating this forage plant for gardens and things. He's also publishing literature, and so this is an editorial from a Chipley newspaper that he in 1909, and he reproduced it and sent it out as a flyer, calling the wonderful plant the greatest foliage plant known to mankind. He sold it all over the country, and this is one of his letterhead from his paper. He pointed that out. He emphasized the fact that it was a forage plant. He emphasized the fact that it was good hay for the animals and everything. We have in our collections, amazingly, a 1910 letter from Colonel Chipley, from Mr. Blunt. Mr. Blunt, William A. Blunt, the Blunt Building downtown. Mr. Blunt was a prominent attorney in Pensacola. And about 1910, he began building an estate, a fancy house, near today's Pensacola Country Club called Sea Marge. And he, this letter to Mr. Blunt, and it's actually a form letter. It's something that Mr. Please had, and he would just personalize it for each person. And here he's writing to Mrs. Blunt, and he's noting that she have an order for 12 kudzu plant to be shipped by mail about February 15th. And so he has this form letter. So he's using this all over the country and all over the South, sending cutting to people for their gardens and their houses and all that. And he's not the only one. This is a article. This flyer come from Birmingham, Alabama, 1915 newspaper ad about growing a field of kudzu hay, 3 tons per acre, and how wonderful this plant will be, and so forth. Now, Please continued to crusade for the kudzu plant. And by 1934, even the U.S. Soil Service was now recommending it for soil coverage. They published this little booklet called Kudzu for Erosion Control in the Southeast, a farmer's bulletin that they published in 1939. The reason this is, and of course, what happened, we all know happened. I can take pictures like this all over the South. And people ask me, they say, well, how did it escape these gardens and so forth? You have to remember about the Great Depression came along, and also World War II. And there weren't people in the South. I mean, this was a plant that had to be cut every day. I mean, it had to be trimmed, it had to be washed over. And if the farmers had left the farm, or left the crop to just lie fallow in the field, the one thing that would overtake them would be kudzu. And today, the kudzu covers all of the areas of the South, and we call it an infestation. And you notice it does reach into the northern parts of the state. My home state of Illinois, the upper part of that state, closer to Chicago, gets really cold in winter and freezes. The southern part of the state, it does freeze occasionally, but very rarely do they get snow. Although I see St. Louis is in that arc as well. But it has just overtaken the South. And when they began recommending kudzu, my plea began getting more and more orders. And he was hard pressed to keep up. And due to the Depression, he almost nearly lost everything. But eventually, kudzu grew out of control, invading the South. Today, it's considered a nuisance, a weed, the mile-a-minute vine. There are jokes about kudzu that if you dropped a kudzu plant in the ground and then run to the farmhouse, it would beat you there, for example. What is interesting is the United Nations also has this on their list as a weed, a noxious weed that they would like to see stamped out. Mr. Plea's grave in Chipley, Florida, is marked Kudzu Pioneers, honoring him for promoting kudzu in the South. And they also erected a historical marker by the state of Florida in the county, Washington County, to celebrate his bringing kudzu, developing kudzu throughout the South. Today, we might not think of it as such a heroic measure, but like I say, this is an interesting story, and it certainly, next time you'd go driving through the South and you see kudzu vine growing all over everything, think about Chipley, Florida, Mr. Please and his nursery. And this has been another story from our collections here in the archive. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Let me, I can't see the chat here if there is one. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all very much for attending, and we'll have another story from the archives again in the near future. Bye.